Hey guys, this video is all about getting the most out of your beloved DF 500 or its big brother, the XL 700. I've got a few tips and tricks to show you. So yeah, let's get going. So occasionally I will realize that this plunge depth is not appropriate for the job I'm doing. I was installing some magnets, some hidden magnets. I needed a custom depth, and these 5mm increments didn't work out with either machine. So no big shake. What you can do, let me release this. Okay. So what I've done to accommodate that is I just make these simple plastic spacers. And these can be easily made from sprinkler riser, right? Or an appropriate size that fits this shaft. I believe the small shaft, or the shaft on the smaller machine is the same. Let's see if we can release that and see what that looks like. There we go. Yep. So this, on this one, you could cut it as little rings and just put it over that. I guess you could do the same on this one, but I like cutting more than half. You can see how that's more than half. And then on this end, it's less than half. And with that, it allows that piece to snap in place even while this is, you know, installed. And then you can easily remove that, make an adjustment, cut a little more if you need to, snap that dude in place, and now you have a custom depth stop. So as you can see, I've used this a number of times for different depths. I try not to cut these down because they just get smaller and smaller. So I just make a new one every time, and now I have a nice variety of custom depth stop. So to keep things safe and simple, I just take these over to the bandsaw. I can slice them to length and then make this notch. Keeps your fingers safe, right? Very effective. So I made this thing a few years ago, and I am so glad I did. It's just basically a board, right? And I've got all these mortises cut into it from 4 all the way up to 14mm. And I have two different sizes. I have the normal setting and the wide setting. And these were all made with the larger machine. Of course, you could make one for the smaller machine that had, all 3 settings. And with that, it just helps with layout. You can see I have some center marks on some of these dominoes. And if I have a component and I'm trying to lay out how many I need to put in that component for whatever reason, I have these center marks. And some of these have been sized to where I remove this little rib on each side, and it just makes it easier for layout. But with everything in one place, it just makes it easy to create those accurate layouts. And you can see I have a few shop-made dominoes, and I'll show a little bit more on that here in a bit.
So here's a good little trick for connecting curved parts. I did use the domino connectors, but I wanted a little bit more clamping pressure, although I kind of screwed up. But let me just show you what's going on here.
All right, so I goofed. I'm clamping these curved sections, and I had left these little nubs when I cut this close with the bandsaw. And I had put a clamp here, and I had put one out here. This clamp must have been tighter because this is nice and tight here, and it opened up my joint. I noticed that this morning. That's not going to work, so I'll have to cut that, redo that. And I made these real quick. That'll just go in there. I'll use one singular clamp. With one clamp, that'll go right across the middle of the joint and perpendicular to it, and that should pull everything nice and tight. I may even put one clamp top and one underneath. But yeah, so that's how we learn, right? Mistake. Take one, take two. As many takes as it takes.
But no big shake. It all worked out. This weird shaped top was quite large, so I glued everything together except for one field seam out at the job site.
All right, so what we have here are some shop-made dominoes. And you can see I've got some out of maple, walnut, oak. Here's one out of Purple Heart, cherry, right? You can make these any size. There's some 4mm. Looks like cherry, 4mm. Yeah, I've even made these out of Baltic birch. Super easy to do. I'll leave a link in a description, or I'll leave a link somewhere for another YouTube video to show exactly how I make these. And once you're set up to make them and the size is right, I always suggest just making a bunch of them, because if the size is right, they're gonna fit. They're always gonna fit, and you're set up to make them, so you might as well make a ton at the time. Super easy to do. Looks like a 5mm. Boom. Beautiful, perfect fit. Now, if you're concerned about hydraulics, which is that weird phenomenon when you have glue on the mortise or on the tenon and you go to insert it and it just comes right back out. Or if you force it, the hydraulics can literally split the wood. Well, it's easy enough to cut little glue grooves on the edge. Number of ways to do those. You could tilt the blade at a 45 on a table saw and just run a little kerf on each side, and that'll allow the glue to escape. Let's see if I have any here. Here's one. Does that show up? You can see that little glue groove right there on the edge. That's probably what is that, a 6? This might be a custom sized tenon, but it all operates the same way. Yeah, it's probably a 6. Maybe a little tight, but yeah, you get the idea, right? Fabulous. All right, I can't show too much of this, but what I have here is a chest of drawers, and this top, this is a solid wood top. And so with solid wood top, it's kind of typical to use what are called buttons. And so you literally just create a slot. These buttons go within that slot, and that allows seasonal movement of this solid wood top. Let's get under here and take a look. You can see these buttons in the back. Let's see if that'll focus. There we go. So you can see that slot is created with a domino. It's elongated to allow movement. So as that top expands and contracts seasonally, it can move backwards toward the wall. Here in the front, you can see this rail, and you can see the rail is attached with screws to the top directly. And so this overhang in the front will remain the same. All the expansion and contraction will move toward the wall or away from the wall seasonally. So not only does the dock make it easy to cut small parts, because you can just leave this thing running and bring the parts to the machine rather than the machine to the parts. But anyway, another feature or advantage of having a dock is that you can make all your adjustments. Everything's right here. You can change angle. You can see everything, right? Awesome. So I want to set up this 4mm bit to cut some mortises in some narrow stock like this.
So with the domino in an upright position in the cradle or the dock, it's a lot easier to make all these adjustments for the depth and for the, the height of the mortise. And what I have here, or what I'm removing here, is the dummy shim. This is made by SENECA Woodworking, and I'll leave a link in the description. Incidentally, the Dock Plate XL comes with these button head type screws that require an Allen head. And I'm that weird guy that likes Phillips screws. it seems like a lot of the screws that I use, from 5/8 all the way up to 4-inch, 6-inch, they all require one drive, a number 2 Phillips. And so I changed out my screws. It just makes it easy for me. I know a lot of people don't like Phillips, but yeah, it works for me. And when I'm doing something like this, I don't use an impact. I use a drill with a light clutch setting. That way you don't mess up those screw heads. You know, this is awesome for, say, router bases. Same thing, you can use a drill with a light clutch. And here you can see these stops with the locking knobs. Fabulous for repeated cuts. There's also a couple of holes in the dock plate XL to accommodate an Automax clamp. And that'll hold your workpieces nice and secure. Of course, you can see more on SENECA Woodworking's website.
So these have already been ran. I'm going to show you how this would work. So we've got the XL plate set up, got the depth set up. I would have some narrow stock like this, and you can just imagine how cumbersome and challenging it would be to clamp this piece down, right? And then just take this big old machine, well, minus the dock. Take this big old machine, try to clamp this down somehow, and make this cut into the end of this workpiece. Tricky, challenging, maybe even dangerous. But with the dock, you can set this in place, bring this dude here, the machine is on, you can add a clamp here, or your fingers are plenty far enough away from the bit to make this safe. Make the cut, turn it over, make the cut. The corresponding piece would work the same way. Of course, I would have one stop removed, make the cut, turn it around, make the other cut.
And boom, 4mm dominoes in some small material, all created with the large machine and the SENECA adapter. How cool is that?
So you want to add some strength to your dominoes? Check this out. I've got this ladder and it just goes up to this loft in my shop, right? And this thing's made out of plywood, Baltic birch. And you can see, instead of creating or cutting dados, I just use a piece of 3/4 Baltic birch on the outside, put a piece of 1/4 inch on the inside to mimic a dado, right? Super strong. And then to add some strength through dominoes that are wedged. This thing's, I don't know, 4 years old. I'm about 200 pounds and I go up and down that thing quite often. And yeah, very strong. You're probably familiar with a mortise and tenon joint, very strong. Essentially, that's what a domino is. Sometimes called a loose tenon or a floating tenon. But what if we glued this in solid and then drilled holes in them? We could run a peg through that hole and that would strengthen that joint, right? Or we can offset that hole in the tenon, and now that becomes a drawbore mortise and tenon. So this is an old sample and I've since used this for something else. I don't know if I was sanding a curve or what, but this is old, and I've got a 14mm domino glued in place. I've got a hole drilled, and this is actually, like I said, just a sample. This would be too close. If you were to do a drawbore tenon, it would probably be 2 tenons centered in this material so that this wall thickness would be much more substantial. This is a little bit too close, but for the video it's fine, just for an example. And so that goes in place. This has a hole in it, and you put this in place, and then you can mark the tenon with maybe a brad point bit. I like these little, they're like a punch, but they have a center, they're center finders basically, or a transfer punch set. And this would go inside that hole, and we would just make a little dimple on that tenon or domino. And then we can take that to the drill press and we can slightly offset that, biasing that hole toward the joint. Maybe a 30-second, you don't want to go too much. If it's offset too much, you'll have a hard time getting the dowel to engage in that hole. So offset it by maybe a 30-second, or what is that, 0.8 millimeter, 7 or 8/10 of a millimeter offset. And once you add glue, you could add glue to the hole, add glue to the dowel. You can see that that is tapered, so that will engage. And literally, this will draw those pieces together without any clamps. And I'm not gonna put this in because I would never be able to get it out, but you can see the process there, yeah? It's a great technique for larger tenons. I wouldn't do it on anything probably less than 10, maybe ideal for 12 or 14. You could probably get away with 10, but these other ones are a little bit too small. If you try to draw bore something like this, you really don't have enough material there to add a lot of strength or value. But 12 or 14 millimeter, it would work fantastically well. This is my Rubo bench. It's about 8 years old now, and you can see that this leg to rail was attached with draw bore. You can see the draw bores there. Kind of adds a decorative element if you use a contrasting species. So this bench is made of ambrosia maple and bubinga. So decorative and functional, right?
All right, let me show you this. It's kind of funny, but very effective. So I've got all these 6mm dominoes taped together, and check out this vacuum hose. Runs all the way to a shop vac and a dust deputy. Let's flip that on. I suppose you could cut these at the bandsaw, but the ends aren't real clean. I like using a chop saw, but they tend to go all over your shop, right? So you can see I got a line marked. I'm holding the guard open with my hand, and I can make those cuts, and the vacuum would suck up all the parts. Have it far enough away so it just pulls them away from the blade, and then I can just simply move those with my hand. Now, check out this contraption. I just use an extension and some screen. You can see this 1/8 by 1/8 mesh inside there. It's glued in place, held in place with epoxy. And I can slip that in place, make all my cuts, and then gather up the pieces. It works incredibly well. Yeah, man. That's how you do it.
So everybody loves the Festool Domino for cutting mortises, right? Well, it's a vastly versatile tool. And what I've got here is a piece of Baltic birch and a handful of bearings. Anyway, I use the Festool to cut these slots. I've got a piece of brass rod, 3/16 brass rod, and I'll show you what I'm doing with this soon. It's going to be very cool if it works. And if it doesn't, then you might not see it.
Well, he's a dork. But it did work, and it is very cool. So you can see this bearing block. So with a domino, I was able to create these slots, one of them for the bearing and one of them for the axle.
Okay, so I got all my 6mm slots cut for the bearing, right? And then I need to make one that goes across, similar to this, for the brass rod to hold the bearing. And everything's set up except the depth is not quite right. This depth, I am limited on this to the depth stop with these 5mm increments. Not quite right for me. Super easy solution. This is some irrigation risers, sprinkler risers for your lawn. I just cut a piece, right? Modified it slightly to look like that, so that this dude will just snap on and off like that. And I can make these any length I want. That goes up in there. Yeah, super easy solution. Those work the best.
A little redundant with that last clip, but I just wanted to show you that depth stop with the sprinklerizer. Super easy. All right, and here I have all the axles glued in place, and let me show you what this is for. All right, so you may or may not have seen the door that goes between my garage and my shop, but it's a large door. It looks like it's stacked layers of Baltic birch. This is the sub-assembly that I'm making this with this bearing block. Laying on the door there is the deadbolt. And got the sub-assembly in place. Let me remove this cover. This will all get glued in place during assembly, or it got glued in place during assembly. You can see that bearing block down on the bottom. And with that, once the cover's in place, that slot has a magnet. These sheets of Baltic birch veneer will go over the top. There's a magnet right there where my knife is attracted. I'll use a key of sorts that has a magnet embedded within it, and that will activate or move the deadbolt open and closed. Ah, yeah. Incidentally, that deadbolt was a large chunk of metal about 1 foot long, and with some aluminum attached, then a magnet, because the magnet wouldn't attract to the deadbolt without the magnet. It needed the magnet to activate correctly. And here, if you look closely, you can see the magnet activating that deadbolt, open and closed, locked and unlocked, basically. I just did this for fun. It's really not, a key component to entering or exiting the building. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this and got some use out of it. You can see more at SENECA Woodworking and Ramon Valdez Fine Furniture YouTube channels.